Hey Thursday friends, you ready to have some more of your questions answered? I'm so glad that that's why you're here, because here we go. I'm going to start with what was sent in. And just a reminder, if you want me to answer something of yours, I will keep your name off of it so that nobody knows you're asking, because I understand some people need anonymity. Send it through the messages or drop it in the comments, and here we go. All right, question number one. This actually came from a member of the public. All right, and I love that. It's not just realtors hanging out with me over here. It's some normal people too. All right, what does it mean when a house is back on the market? Is this bad? All right, so let's talk about what that means. When a house hits the market, it shows up fresh on all the websites, and it basically is like a new person walking into the club at night, and everybody's head swivels to go see who came in here. And then some of the heads swivel back and say, no, not for me, right? Well, the same thing happens with houses. If everybody looked at that new house on the market and it didn't fit, sometimes that homeowner will take it off the market and say, you know what, that's a sign, I'm going to sit tight for a minute. Often off the market is people taking a breather. And that happens actually a lot in the fourth quarter, because we do see some home sellers that don't want to fool with this during Thanksgiving and Christmas, that they're going to have family in the house and just don't want to have a house on the market. And so they pull it off and take a breather. It's not necessarily negative about the property. It could just be a personal choice. Now, there are moments when a house goes off the market, and that references it going under contract. So it may say that it's in escrow, it's pending, it's under contract. There's a lot of different names for that. And that doesn't mean that the house has anything's wrong. It just means that buyer is jumping through their hoops. When a house is under contract, now that we're in more of a normal market, it's easier to explain it. The buyer is going to probably have a home inspection. They may also do a radon inspection. They may do a lead-based paint check. They may have the well and septic checked out if it's on well and septic. They may want to have a survey done to see if the neighbor's fence is encroaching. They'll probably have to get an appraisal to satisfy their mortgage lender, or if they're a cash buyer, they can get an appraisal too. There's a lot of steps being crossed in that investigation period. Now, sometimes during that period, buyers will say, not for me. Now that could be for a million reasons, y'all. It could be because the home inspection had repairs that the buyer wasn't aware of and not comfortable with. It could be it didn't appraise and they couldn't work anything out. It could be there was an encroachment issue with the survey and that wasn't able to be worked out. It could be that the buyer lost their job. It could be that the buyer lied on their loan application and couldn't get financing. It could be that the buyer's spouse is leaving them and they suddenly realize life is getting upended. It could be that the job changed. There are so many reasons for a house to go off the market, come back on, and the only person who really knows the truth is often that person who was right square in the middle of it. Now, if you're a regular person and you're thinking, but I would like to know why it came on and off, you may not always get that information, because there is no law that makes you disclose why something went on or off. Now, as your realtor, I will ask, because I'm going to find out if there's something that should be disclosed. Is there information you should be aware of? For example, the buyer looked at a house and it had a crack in the foundation and the seller did not tell anybody. Well, now they would have to, because they're aware of it. They would want to let my buyer know as well. So again, lots of reasons. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, I will point out that sometimes when a house has come back on market, it's because there was an inspection done and the seller may have taken it off to do the repairs, and now it came back on in different condition. That might even be a good reason for it to go off and on the market. All I can say is your realtor will get you as much information as they can. We'll do the best we can, but ultimately, if you want that house, our job is to help you figure out how to get it in a way that makes sense. Now, we're not looking to drag anybody over the coals or leave any blood on the table. Our job is to get as much information as possible so you can make good decisions. And as home sellers, you should also know that as your realtor, we're going to help defend you in the marketplace as much as we can. And that's where we got to be fair and honest and open with the public, because we owe a very important duty to the public. All right. Oh, I got a story to tell with this one. So I'll answer the question, then I'll tell my story. All right. Do you think, Leigh Brown, having a property management company is essential to running a rental, short-term or long-term? If so, what should someone look for? All right, listen. I have been a realtor for 22 years. I own several rental properties, and it would be a cold day, you know where, before I would ever manage my own rentals, period, end of discussion. Long-term, mid-term, short-term, overnight, I'm not managing a rental ever again. And here's why, y'all. First of all, property management is a high headache, low margin business. Property managers handle a lot of properties because most of them are smooth sailing. But there's a few in there that are like that little black cartoon cloud where it follows that person around and rains on them when everything else is sunny. Every property manager has a couple of those properties. And frankly, I do not have the time, nor the bandwidth, nor the patience to handle that kind of foolishness. Plus, many of the tenants in every marketplace know the law really well. They know it better than the person who owns the property they're in. And if a regular person owns a rental property, that tenant may know more than you about tenant-landlord law. So putting a person in the middle who is a professional and highly skilled, carrying insurance and up-to-date on tenant-landlord legislation and regulation is worth their weight in gold. Now, that's on any kind of rental. Now, in specific on short-term rentals, I would be a fan of a property manager if I owned any, just because the check-ins, check-outs, management of cleaning and maintenance can be a hassle. And I guess I do have one because I have a beach rental house, but we use a regular property manager for that. It's not in any of the systems that rhyme with Airbnb. It's just one brand name for short-term rentals. I'm just teasing. But we have those weekly rentals. Now, I pay more in property management fee for that one because there's a higher level of work required than there is on a long-term residential rental. All I can say is this: you'll think you're overpaying until you have a bad tenant. The minute you have a bad tenant, your property manager is not paid nearly enough. That's y'all's snippet to cut out. That's a real good short. Okay. Now, I promised I would tell y'all a story here about a rental property. And this is why you want a property manager. Okay. So I owned 2 townhouses in Charleston, South Carolina several years ago. They were near the Medical University of South Carolina. It was in a complex that was converting from rentals to owned. And I thought, well, I'll buy 2 of these. I'll put renters in it, and one day the value will go up, and then I will sell them. So bought the units at a very good price. And don't even ask me if I wish I still had them, because part of me says yes and part of me says no, because I learned some things about tenant-landlord law in South Carolina and with this unit. One evening, I got a call from the property manager letting me know that a car had it was a truck, had busted through the gates of the complex and gone straight into the townhouse building. The person driving the truck was intoxicated, was my tenant, and he was heading for home, but he missed. He thought he was at home, but he actually drove his truck into the unit next to mine. So my tenant was 3 sheets to the wind and drove into the unit next to mine. And of course, as a result, he went to go spend the night in the county facilities to A, dry out, and B, because he needed to have a minute to, gather himself. And so then I said to my property manager, I said, well, what do I do now? Because he did get locked up for more than a minute. And I found out that in South Carolina, you don't get to evict an incarcerated tenant. And so I had that unit sit for several months with all of his belongings in it because I was waiting. I was waiting on him to get released from lockup. And after he was released and on his own recognizance, I imagine, he came and got his stuff and moved along. And that was the moment where I said, I love my property manager. I am so grateful he handled that mess, but I'm out. So I sold those rental properties, and that was the last time I owned anything in South Carolina. And no offense, South Carolina, I'm a licensed South Carolina realtor, but I'm not buying any more rental properties near MUSC. All right? Okay. That was a rabbit hole. I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, next story. Well, next question, actually. Next question. As a seller, do I have to offer a cash incentive to cover part of the buyer's closing cost? I feel like I keep seeing this on other properties, and I'm worried I can't compete since home prices are starting to come down. Now, first of all, I will say that wherever you're watching this video from, your zip code is operating differently than the zip code I live in. The zip code I live in is operating differently than the one right across the county line. Real estate is so micro local, you've really got to be dialed into your local numbers. But also, I love that there are trends that happen all over the place that we could all be aware of. Now, if you're an early career realtor, you might not be familiar with some of these creative financing options and creative selling options. And what this person is referencing is a seller contributing to closing costs. This was very normal prior to the big run-up, hugely important during the last recession, because for a buyer who's having trouble saving money, hello inflation, if they've managed to get 3.5% for an FHA loan, they may not have the extra $5,000 for the loan closing cost. So they may ask the seller to cover it. And the way you look at it is this: if the house would cost $300,000 and the buyer needs $5,000 in closing costs, many sellers will look at that as, I will do it for $305, because then $5,000 goes towards the buyer's closing cost and $300 is where the seller will start taking out their expenses to find the net dollars. So it becomes something that's actually baked into the number, but it keeps the buyer from coming up with the money out of pocket, and the seller can treat it like any other incentive. Now, whether or not you offer it up front depends on you. I think it's really important for the realtor to be prepared to educate the other agent on this, because not everybody is familiar with how they work, because again, they've been out of vogue for a few years. It can be an effective tool. There are other effective tools on creative financing. There are adjustable rate mortgages that people are looking at now to get that rate down. There are buy downs where the seller could contribute some money to lowering that interest rate. So for example, as of this recording, we're looking at 7% on a 30-year fixed. The seller could contribute a few $1,000s and get that interest rate down, which will pay for itself over the long haul. It's something that can draw somebody into the house. Maybe the seller's house has a VA loan on it that could be assumed by the buyer. That's something that will be wonderful to advertise as well. So you don't have to if you're the home seller. There's lots of different ways to create the information pipeline, but you should be open to different ways to make the deal happen if indeed you want the house to sell. Now, one question you didn't ask about that I'll answer is, what about agent bonuses? Now, we've seen this forever. Maybe as a home seller, instead of offering X%, you want to offer X plus 1. Maybe you want to offer X% plus $5,000 in a bonus. The most important thing is that you put that into the multiple listing service so that it's a unilateral offer, because you certainly do not want to discriminate amongst the realtors in your marketplace. But also just be prepared for the buyer to ask for that, because in a world where the compensation is under discussion at consultation, as it always should be, and where buyers have the chance to figure out what makes sense for their budget, the agent may want to put that on the buyer's side to help them buy down their note. They can buy them a washer and dryer with it. There's different ways to play it as long as everything is fully disclosed and on paper. The interesting thing is that an agent out there who's only got one possibility to get paid may be more interested in a property that does carry a higher level of compensation. Just make sure that when your agent talks to that buyer agent, they confirm that the buyer is fully aware, so that everybody has been disclosed and we have no footsie under the table, as my daddy would have said once upon a time. All right, so let me add one more little caveat here at the end of our Q&A. This last question, the asker was concerned about prices coming down. Now, if you are on Twitter, which is affectionately known as a dumpster fire, you will see a lot of prognosticators saying real estate prices are going to come down 20%. All right, look, nobody knows. People want you to click on articles, all right? So what I would suggest that you watch are the number of available properties versus the number that are under contract. That's going to tell you the absorption rate in an area. And as you see inventory grow and contracts slow down, then that's creating a reason for sellers to start compressing the price if they need to sell, but not every seller does. And some people have equity, so they'd rather just stay put. There's no way to know what's going to happen next in your zip code. A betting person would say that we're heading into a pretty choppy part of the market coming up here. So just be thoughtful about the process, talk to your realtor about pros and cons, and look at some bigger economic data, because we can weather a whole lot of storms if we just know what we're sailing into. I'll see you next time.